How are you, man? Yeah, yeah.
I'm a friend of Tracy Brennan.
Oh, yeah.
She loves working with me, she says.
Okay, Chris, if you just let your name and...
Chris Miller, generic. All right. Oh, yep. You good?
Stand by.
All right.
Hold on.
Stand by.
Okay.
So, John, in preparing for this role, what did you learn about Poe that intrigued you the most?
Some things that I didn't think of. You know, I didn't think he was going to be quite so combative, or I didn't think he. I've forgotten how funny some of his writings were, or how satiric some of them were. How many different genres that he created. You know, from science fiction to the supernatural to the horror to the detective genre. You know. So I think when you look into the guy, there's so much there that, you know, you sort of take for granted when you see him out there in the culture, and you go, oh wow, it all comes back to this guy. Wow.
It's amazing how much stuff funnels
Yeah.
back down. Did you get to read a lot of the works in your preparation?
Yeah,
and
of course.
Was there one
Yeah.
story that kind of stuck out for you that really spoke
Well,
to
I
you?
sort of looked for the stuff that he wrote that was more revealing about himself. So like the stories like The Imp of the Perverse that are talking about his dance with self-destruction and stuff, I think were really fascinating pieces of writing and like confessional pieces of writing. And so those are just fantastic. And you can see how those have affected so many other writers, you know.
And
Even in Europe and back in the States later, you know, how that style and that sort of brazen sort of honesty was like, people must have been like, oh my God.
He was like so in your face.
Yeah.
You know, as far as working with James on this, can you talk a little bit about him as a director and his directing style and kind of, you know, how you guys collaborated to bring Poe to life?
Yeah, I think once we had agreed that the script, the conceit of the film was there, which was Poe becomes a character in one of his own stories and becomes swept up in one of his sort of things. So that seemed very clever. And then the work we did was really just, you know, fleshing out who he was and what side of Poe we wanted to see, and then making sure that the dialogue that came out of his mouth was consistent with his vocabulary, you know, his idiom, his way of speaking, and that was sort of the work we did together on it. And then I think, you know, pretty soon as we started to work, we were finishing each other's sentences pretty quick. So everybody was on the same page. You know, the movie was well formed as what it was, and so it was something that we just.
And then can you talk a little bit about how, you know, his shooting style and, like, you know, there's some great imagery in this film, and you know, did you notice that when you guys were shooting on set, or was it?
Yeah, no, he's technically a master of the aesthetics that he wants. So those things, you come in and those things are pretty much thought out. And then as you come in, you adjust. He would adjust them to you if you had different ideas, and you would, you know, adjust into his things. But you know, he definitely. It wasn't like he came to the set like, what are we going to do today? You know, he definitely knew what he wanted to do, and then he would work with you. And sometimes it would change, but mostly it was and he can work with actors. He understands actors. He's got a really, really big brain, big mind, and you know, he doesn't sort of just talk for the sake of talking, but he's very direct. And you know, some people talk a lot, but it doesn't really mean anything. And he's very precise, and I loved working with him.
You also have a great cast in the film. Can you talk a little bit about working with Luke Evans and?
Yeah, Luke was great, and Alice Eve was great. Harder roles because, you know, Edgar is such a extreme character, but they both define themselves really beautifully in the movie, I think.
Can you talk a little bit about, you got to work with a pet raccoon in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? And did you have to do training before?
No, just pretended he was my cat. Hung out with him.
Cool. What do you think Poe's influence on our culture is? Like, as a cultural icon, I mean, you mentioned he kind of started these you know, the science fiction genre, the mystery novel, but like, do you think his effect was more profound than just in this jazz?
I think as a poet and as a kind of an explorer into the subconscious and underworld, I think, you know, he was a pioneer, so I think his stuff, you know, is incredibly powerful and impactful, and I think that's why he's become sort of this archetype that way.
And do you think he was a genius?
Yes.
And a genius that no one understood?
I think in his time, some people understood it, but he was such a combative person. And a lot of times people, things that, the thing about like art and literature and anything is, it's very rare something is always proclaimed. Things need time to breathe, and so, it's like everybody says a movie, it's an instant classic. Well, what does that mean? For it to be a classic, it has to still be affecting people in 20 years. So you have to wait and see, and people interact with it, and it gets in their mind and sticks around. And so a lot of times, there were a lot of geniuses who, Van Gogh died, broke, and then...
Right. Chopping his ear off.
Yeah, so he was a classic, one of those kind of people that was really appreciated later. And it really took the French, Baudelaire, a little bit later, brought him back into the consciousness. And
it's
he got famous in Europe again before he got famous in the States.
And it's almost like he never got to enjoy his own fame, basically.
No,
Yeah.
no. Although he did, he was recognized as a kind of a master and a genius in some ways, but he had such a tortured life. But The Raven was a world-famous poet, but he had no copyright, so he only got paid a couple bucks for it, and then it was printed in every paper all over the world.
Yeah.
So he was a world-famous poet, but he was still living hand to mouth.
Right. What was the best thing for you about making this movie?
I think it was just a very good, solid creative process, and I felt like we got to go in and make the movie with the actors and the director, and we all got to give it our best shot, and we weren't sort of interfered with, and I felt like we gave it a really serious, solid, our best effort to make this movie, and that's sort of all you can ask for.
Cool. Thank you. That's all I have. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for taking the time.